Hello, this is Morel Benard with the continuation of the story, David Copperfield. Last words were that I have never felt for any other human being. It was a sort of comical affection too, and yet, if she had died, I cannot think what I should have done, or how I should have acted out the tragedy it would have been to me. And by the way, before I proceed further, please subscribe to Study Coach UK channel. Please subscribe and please share. Okay, let me continue with the story of David Copperfield. In the morning, Miss Murdstone appeared as usual and told me I was going to school. She was not altogether such news to me as she supposed. She also informed me that when I was dressed, I was to come downstairs into the parlour and have my breakfast. There I found my mother, very pale with red eyes, into whose arms I ran and begged her pardon from my suffering soul. "Oh, Davy," she said, "that you could hurt anyone I love. Try to be better. Pray to be better. I forgive you, but I'm so grieved. Davy, that you should have such bad passions in your heart." They had persuaded her that I was a wicked fellow, and she was more sorry for that than for my going away. I felt it sorely. I tried to eat my part in breakfast, but my tears dropped upon my bread and butter and trickled into my tea. I saw my mother look at me sometimes, and then glance at the watchful Miss Murdstone, and then look down or look away. "Master Copperfield's box here," said Miss Murdstone, when wheels were heard at the gate. I looked for Peggoty, but it was not she. Neither she nor Mr. Murdstone appeared. My former acquaintance, the carrier, was at the door. The box was taken out to his cart and lifted in. "Clara," said Miss Murdstone in her warning note. "Ready, my dear Jane?" returned my mother. "Goodbye, Davy. You are going for your own good. Goodbye, my child. You will come home in the holidays and be a better boy." "Clara," Miss Murdstone repeated. "Certainly, my dear Jane," replied my mother, who was holding me. "I forgive you, my dear boy. God bless you." "Clara," Miss Murdstone repeated. Miss Murdstone was good enough to take me out of the cart and to say on the way that she hoped I would repent before I came to a bad end. And then I got into the cart, and the lazy horse walked off with it. We might have gone about a mile, and my pocket handkerchief was quite wet through, when the carrier stopped short. Looking out to ascertain for what, I saw, to my amazement, Peggoty burst from a hedge and climb into the cart. She took me in both her arms and squeezed me to her stays until the pressure on my nose was extremely painful, though I never thought of that till afterwards, when I found it very tender. Not a single word did Peggoty speak. Releasing one of her arms, she put it down in her pocket to the elbow and brought out some paper bags of cakes, which she crammed into my pockets, and a purse which she put into my hand. But not one word did she say. After another, and a final squeeze with both arms, she got down from the cart and ran away. And my belief is, and has always been, without a solitary button on her gown. I picked up one of several that were rolling about, and treasured it as a keepsake for a long time. The carrier looked at me, as if to inquire if she were coming back. I shook my head and said I thought not. "Then come up," said the carrier to the lazy horse, who came up accordingly. Having by this time cried as much as I possibly could, I began to think it was of no use crying any more, especially as neither Roderick Random nor that captain in the Royal British Navy had ever cried, that I could remember, in trying situations. The carrier, seeing me in this resolution, proposed that my pocket handkerchief should be spread upon the horse's back to dry. I thanked him and assented, and particularly small it looked under those circumstances. I had now leisure to examine the purse. It was a stiff leather purse with a snap, and had 3 bright shillings in it, which Peggoty had evidently polished up with whitening for my greater delight. But its most precious contents were 2 half-crowns folded together in a bit of paper, on which was written in my mother's hand, "For Davy, with my love." I was so overcome by this that I asked the carrier to be so good as to reach me my pocket handkerchief again. But he said he thought I had better do without it, and I thought I really had. So I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and stopped myself. For good, too, though in consequence of my previous emotions, I was still occasionally seized with a stormy sob. After we had jogged on for some little time, I asked the carrier if he was going all the way. "All the way where?" inquired the carrier. "There," I said. "Where's there?" inquired the carrier. "Near London," I said. "Why, that horse," said the carrier, jerking the rein to point him out, "would be deader than pork afore he got over half the ground." "Are you only going to Yarmouth, then?" I asked. "Well, that's about it," said the carrier. "And there I shall take you to the stage-coach, and the stage-coach that'll take you to wherever it is." As this was a great deal for the carrier, whose name was Mr. Barkis, to say, he being, as I observe in a former chapter, of a phlegmatic temperament and not at all conversational, I offered him a cake as a mark of attention, which he ate at one gulp, exactly like an elephant, and which made no more impression on his big face than it would have done on my elephant's. "Did she make him now?" said Mr. Barkis, always leaning forward in his slouching way on the footboard of the cart with an arm on each knee. "Peggoty, do you mean, sir?" "Ah," said Mr. Barkis. "Her. Yes, she makes all our pastry and does all our cooking." "Do she, though?" said Mr. Barkis. He made up his mouth as if to whistle, but he didn't whistle. He sat looking at the horse's ears as if he saw something new there, and sat so for a considerable time. By and by he said, "No sweethearts, I believe?" "Sweetmeats, did you say, Mr. Barkis?" For I thought he wanted something else to eat, and had pointedly alluded to that description of refreshment. "Hearts," said Mr. Barkis. "Sweethearts. No person walks with her." "With Peggoty?" "Ah," he said, "her." "Oh, no. She never had a sweetheart." "Didn't she, though?" said Mr. Barkis. Again he made up his mouth to whistle, and again he didn't whistle, but sat looking at the horse's ears. "So she makes," said Mr. Barkis after a long interval of reflection. "All the apple parties, and does all the cooking, do she?" I replied that such was the fact. "Well, I'll tell you what," said Mr. Barkis. "Perhaps you might be writing to her." "I shall certainly write to her," I rejoined. "Ah," he said, slowly turning his eyes towards me. "Well, if you was writing to her, perhaps you'd recollect to say that Barkins was willing. Would you?" "That Barkis is willing," I repeated innocently. "Is that all the message?" "Yes," he said, considering. "Yes, Barkis is willing." "But she will be at Blunderstone again tomorrow, Mr. Barkis," I said, faltering a little at the idea of my being far away from it then, and could give your own message so much better. As he repudiated this suggestion, however, with a jerk of his head, and once more confirmed his previous request by saying with profound gravity, "Barkis is willing. That's the message." I readily undertook its transmission. While I was waiting for the coach in the hotel at Yarmouth, that very afternoon I procured a sheet of paper and an inkstand and wrote a note to Peggoty, which ran thus: "My dear Peggoty, I have come here safe. Barkis is willing. My love to Mama. Yours affectionately. P.S. He says he particularly wants you to know Barkis is willing." When I had taken this commission on myself respectively, Mr. Barkis relapsed into perfect silence, and I, feeling quite worn out by all that had happened lately, lay down on a sack in the cart and fell asleep. I slept soundly until we got to Yarmouth, which was so entirely new and strange to me in the inn-yard to which we drove, that I at once abandoned a latent hope I had had of meeting with some of Mr. Peggoty's family there, perhaps even with little Emily herself. The coach was in the yard, shining very much all over, but without any horses to it as yet, and it looked in that state as if nothing was more unlikely than its ever going to London. I was thinking this, and wondering what would ultimately become of my box, which Mr. Barkis had put down on the yard pavement by the pole. He had driven up the yard to turn his cart, and also what would ultimately become of me, when a lady looked out of a bow window where some fowls and joints of meat were hanging up, and said, "Is that the little gentleman from Blunderstone?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "What name?" inquired the lady. "Copperfield, ma'am," I said. "Well, that won't do," returned the lady. "Nobody's dinner is paid for here in that name." "It is Murdstone, ma'am," I said. If you're Master Murdstone, said the lady, why do you go and give another name first? I explained to the lady how it was, who then rang a bell and called out, William, show the coffee room. Upon which a waiter came running out of a kitchen on the opposite side of the yard to show it, and seemed a good deal surprised when he saw only to show it to me. It was a large, long room with some large maps in it. I doubt if I could have felt much stranger in the maps had been real foreign countries, and I cast away in the middle of them. I felt it was taking a liberty to sit down with my cap in my hand on the corner of the chair nearest the door, and when the waiter laid a cloth on purpose for me and put a set of casters on it, I think I must have turned red all over with modesty. He brought me some chops and vegetables and took the covers off in such a bouncing manner that I was afraid I must have given him some offence. But he greatly relieved my mind by putting a chair for me at the table and saying very affable, Now, 6 foot, come on. I thanked him and took my seat at the board, but found it extremely difficult to handle my knife and fork with anything like dexterity, or to avoid splashing myself with the gravy, while he was standing opposite, staring so hard, and making me blush in the most dreadful manner every time I caught his eye. After watching me into the second chop, he said, There's half a pint of ale for you. Will you have it now? I thanked him and said, Yes, upon which he poured it out of a jug into a large tumbler and held it up against the light and made it look beautiful. My eye, he said, it seems a good deal, don't it? It doesn't seem a good deal, I answered with a smile, for it was quite delightful to me to find him so pleasant. He was a twinkling-eyed, pimp-faced man with his hair standing upright all over his head, and as he stood with one arm akimbo, holding up the glass to the light with the other hand, he looked quite friendly. There was a gentleman here yesterday, he said, a stout gentleman by the name of Topsawyer. Perhaps you know him. No, I said, I don't think. In breeches and gaiters, broad-brimmed hat, grey coat, speckled choker, said the waiter. No, I said bashfully, I haven't the pleasure. You came in here, said the waiter, looking at the light through the tumbler, ordered a glass of this ale. Would order it. I told him not. Drank it, and fell dead. It was too old for him. It oughtn't to be drawn, that's the fact. I was very much shocked to hear of this melancholy accident, and said I thought I had better have some water. Why, you see, said the waiter, still looking at the light through the tumbler with one of his eyes shut up. Our people don't like things being ordered and left. It offends them, but I'll drink it if you like. I'm used to it. And use it, everything. I don't think it'll hurt me if I throw my head back and take it off quick. Shall I? I replied that he would much oblige me by drinking it, if he thought he could do it safely, but by no means otherwise. When he did throw his head back and take it off quickly, I had a horrible fear, I confess, of seeing him meet the fate of the lamented Mr. Topsawyer and fall lifeless on the carpet. But it didn't hurt him. On the contrary, I thought he seemed the fresher for it. "What have we got here?" he said, putting a fork into my dish. "Not chops?" "Chops," I said. "Oh, Lord bless my soul," he exclaimed. "I didn't know they were chops. Why, a chop's the very thing to take off the bad effects of that beer. Ain't it lucky?" So he took a chop by the bone in one hand and a potato in the other, and ate away with a very good appetite, to my extreme satisfaction. He afterwards took another chop and another potato, and after that another chop and another potato. When he had done, he brought me a pudding, and having set it before me, seemed to ruminate and to become absent in his mind for some moments. "How's the pie?" he said, roused in himself. "It's a pudding," I made answer. "Pudding!" he exclaimed. "Why, bless me, so it is. What?" Looking at it nearer. "You don't mean to say it's a batter pudding?" "Yes, it is indeed." "Why, a batter pudding," he said, taking up a tablespoon, "is my favourite pudding. Ain't that lucky? Come on, little one, and let's see who'll get most." The waiter certainly got most. He entreated me more than once to come in and win. But what with his tablespoon to my teaspoon, his dispatch to my dispatch, and his appetite to my appetite, I was left far behind at the first mouthful, and had no chance with him. I never saw anyone enjoy pudding so much, I think, and he laughed when it was all gone, as if his enjoyment of it lasted still. Finding him so very friendly and companionable, it was then that I asked for the pen and ink and paper to write to Peggoty. He not only brought it immediately, but was good enough to look over me while I wrote the letter. When I'd finished it, he asked me where I was going to school. I said, near London, which was all I knew. "Oh, my eye," he said, looking very low-spirited. "I'm sorry for that." "Why?" I asked him. "Oh, Lord," he said, shaking his head. "That's the school where they broke the boy's ribs. 2 ribs. A little boy he was. I should say he was. Let me see, how old are you about?" I told him, between 8 and 9. "Oh, that's just the age," he said. "He was 8 years and 6 months old when they broke his first rib. 8 years and 8 months old when they broke his second, and did for him." I could not disguise from myself or from the waiter that this was an uncomfortable coincidence, and inquired how it was done. His answer was not cheery to my spirits, for it consisted of 2 dismal words: "with whopping." The blowing of the coach horn and the yard was a seasonable diversion, which made me get up and hesitantly inquire, in the mingled pride and diffidence of having a purse, which I took out of my pocket, if there were anything to pay. "There's a sheet of letter paper," he returned. Did you ever buy a sheet of letter paper? I could not remember that I ever had. It's dear, he said, on account of the duty. 3d. That's the way we're taxed in this country. There's nothing else, except the waiter. Never mind the ink, I lose that. What should you? What should I? How much I ought to? What would it be right to pay the waiter, if you please? I stammered, blushing. If I hadn't a family, and that family hadn't the cowpox, said the waiter, I wouldn't take a 6d. If I didn't support an aged parent and a lovely sister, here the waiter was greatly agitated, I wouldn't take a farthing. If I had a good place and was treated well here, I should beg acceptance of a trifle instead of taking of it. But I live on broken victuals, and I sleep on the coals. Here the waiter burst into tears. I was very much concerned for his misfortunes, and felt that any recognition short of 9d would be mere brutality and hardness of heart. Therefore, I gave him one of my 3 bright shillings, which he received with much humility and veneration, and spun up with his thumb directly afterwards to try the goodness of. I was a little disconcerting. It was a little disconcerting to me to find, when I was being helped up behind the coach, that I was supposed to have eaten all the dinner without any assistance. I discovered this from overhearing the lady in the bow window say to the guard, "Take care of that child, George, or he'll burst." And from observing that the women servants who were about the place came out to look and giggle at me as a young phenomenon. My unfortunate friend the waiter, who had quite recovered his spirits, did not appear to be disturbed by this, but joined in the general admiration without being at all confused. If I had any doubt of him, I suppose this was half awakened it. But I'm inclined to believe that with the simple confidence of a child, and the natural reliance of a child upon superior years, qualities I am very sorry any children should prematurely change for worldly wisdom, I had no serious mistrust of him on the whole, even then. Do join me. Join me for the next episode. Join me for the next video of David Copperfield. Join me. Next video of David Copperfield. I'll see you then. Okay, bye-bye.